Good morning and welcome to Kaissa's Kitchen. I'm really excited for you to join me today. I'm going to take you through the journey of making bread, healthy sourdough bread from start to finish. I have taught a lot of people how to make sourdough bread, but typically we'll have everything ready. And so they'll see how to mix it and then how it's done, but they don't get to see the steps for real in real time. So that's what we're going to do today. I will talk a little bit about the sourdough start and some of the supplies, and that way if you have questions, those will be answered. But my goal is that if you were really interested in making bread, that you could do this in a follow along style. So the one thing that you'd have to have ready first is your sourdough start. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's pretend that you are ready to go and you have made your sourdough start and you have it in the refrigerator. First thing I do in the morning on the day that I want to make bread is I take it out of the refrigerator to warm it up. And I just took it out. It's still cold like it was in the refrigerator, and that just keeps it from getting really extra ripe, shall we say. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like when I take it out of the refrigerator. You can see that there are a few little bubbles. That is just a good, healthy start. I have used it recently, and so it is ready to be used, but it needs to be fed. So that's why we warm it up. Like I said, it's kind of cool still. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get some of our flour, which I'll talk a little bit more about our flour, but I'm going to show you how we are going to feed the start. I have a measuring cup for the flour and water. Typically, I do not measure, but I want to do that for you to make it really easy. And I have a plastic spoon. We want to use plastic instead of metal. I know I'm measuring flour and water with metal, but that's okay. It's not sourdough. So it's said that the sourdough, because it's fermented, can react with the metal. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add 1/4 cup of flour to my start. And then I'm going to add 1/4 cup of water. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio of water and flour to feed your start. And this, while it's waking up and warming up, will give it the food it needs to really bubble and be ready for us to use in our bread making process. I just wanted you to see the difference between how it was when we started and what it looks like when we feed it, because it typically will bubble a lot more and it gets really happy. All right, so I'm going to leave this for a few minutes while we talk about some things, but you can already see the happy bubbles. It's already eating and growing, shall we say. All right, so let's talk about the kind of flour that I use. This is einkorn flour. And if you've heard of einkorn flour, it is an ancient grain. So it is an ancient wheat, but it has less chromosomes. So that just means that it is easier to digest. It doesn't have as much going on in it. It hasn't been modified at all. It doesn't have any GMO modifications. And so it's better for your body as far as breaking down. Now, if somebody has a celiac situation, they will not be able to eat einkorn. But anyone that has a gluten sensitivity could be okay eating einkorn in the sourdough form because it breaks down most of the gluten because of the makeup of einkorn. You can use regular wheat flour. You can use white wheat or white flour to make this. I haven't done it with any other flours besides those three. I like to grind my grains so that they're fresh. You can kind of see I did a little bit this morning. I've got a nice mess going on. We've got the mock mill that does grinding the grain, and we pour it here in the top and just turn it on. We've got it already set to the finest grain so that it'll be a nice bread flour. And I have einkorn in bulk. Like I buy big bags of 25-pound bags. And so I can show you what that looks like. We're going to move the start This is what an einkorn grain looks like. It looks similar to a wheat grain. May even look a little bit like brown rice. Then we would just pour the grain into the top here and then turn it on. So I've already ground flour. Here we'll show you what the flour freshly ground looks like. It's nice and fluffy. It's not too brown, not too white. So it's a nice combination. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to let our start sit. We have it bubbling and happy. And we're going to let it sit for a few hours. So I generally do about 9 o'clock in the morning. I take it out of the fridge when I know I want to make bread. I feed it and warm it up by allowing it to sit out on the counter. I will generally put the lid back on to keep any flies, dust, or anything else from getting in there. And then about lunchtime, we'll come back and we will mix up the bread. So I'll show you how we do that. See you in a little while. Welcome back to Kaissa's Kitchen. It's been 3 hours since we woke up our start and fed it. I'm going to show you what it looks like now. Got all those great bubbles. You can see the consistency. They call it like pancake batter. So it's thick enough, but not super thin. So that's the consistency of our start. And we'll talk a little bit more about the start because a lot of people have questions about how to start a start. But we're going to assume at this point that you have a sourdough start ready to go. And if you had it ready, first thing, you wouldn't have to go through the first step of waking it up out of the refrigerator and feeding it. If your start was fed and ready to go and warm, this will be your first step that we're doing right now. So we're going to have a bowl that has a lid so that we can actually mix up our bread dough, and it's going to have to sit for a while. So again, I am using einkorn flour today. We had ground some fresh. If you're using wheat flour or bread flour, white flour, any of that kind of stuff, all the instructions are the same. I am using a half cup, but if we imagine this is a 1 cup, we are going to be doing 2 cups of flour. I'm using the smaller one because I don't like to dirty a lot of dishes, and I'm going to use it for the start as well. So first we're going to measure out our flour. So that's 1 cup and 2 cup. So that's our flour. I like to use, this is like a rice scooper stir. It works really well for actually mixing our dough together. The next thing we're going to measure in is our start. Now, it's close to a half a cup. It doesn't have to be exact. If I have a pretty full jar, so I'm going to go ahead and use the full half cup because I have plenty to spare. But if you were making multiple loaves of bread or you didn't quite have that much start, you do not need to use a full half cup. It can be closer to a fourth of a cup. But today I have a plenty of start. Okay, so that is our start and our flour. I'm going to show you there's the start in there and the flour. And now we're going to do water. And again, it's going to be 2 cups of water. That's 1 cup. And 2 cups. Now this is the easiest recipe when it comes to making sourdough bread. There's a lot of different ways that bread can be made. Artesian loaves and things that can be shaped in different ways. But this one, we are going to be using a bread pan, and it will come out like sandwich bread. Next, we're going to do our salt. And we're going to do 2 teaspoons of salt, and I like to use pink Himalayan salt. So you can see the salt there. And I'm going to do 2 teaspoons. Now I've noticed something today as I'm mixing up this bread. You can see the nice bubbles that the dough is making. I've noticed though that it's not as thick as it usually is. And it could be because I'm using this half cup to measure out my 1 cups of dough, flour. And typically I use a 1 cup measuring cup. So because I know the consistency of how the dough should be, I feel like this is a little bit wet. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more flour. And that's mostly just because I fresh ground it, like literally just ground it into this bowl, whereas usually I've ground it, put it into my container, and it's settled more. And so you'll find if that happens with your flour, that it does actually have a different consistency. If you buy flour from the store and it's already in a bag, it's already going to have settled and it won't be as fluffy and light. So this is a much better consistency. Hopefully you can see the difference. It was pretty soft and liquidy. And it still is. Like, this isn't typically what a bread dough would look like. People wouldn't say, oh, that looks like bread. It looks more like a batter. But this is how we want it. So we are actually done. This is how we're going to leave this dough. I want you to look at it, and then when we come back, and it'll be 6 hours. We're going to let it sit and ferment for 6 hours. When we come back in 6 hours, I'll show you what the dough looks like. It doesn't always change a lot of look, like not necessarily more bubbles, but it will raise or fill up the bowl a bit more. So I'm going to put the lid on, pop the air out, and I'm going to leave this to sit for 6 hours until we come back, and then we'll be putting it into the pans. And we'll talk more about the pans, how to grease them, and what those pans are all about. I will have information for you on starting your own start so that you have what you need to do this, because it's super easy once you've got the start going. All right, we'll see you in a little while. Hi, okay, welcome back. Our dough mixture has sat for 6 hours. First, I want to show you the start. After we had used the start in our bread dough mixture, I fed it, and now you can see that it's nice and bubbly and happy. So I just wanted to show you that before I put it back in the refrigerator. So now I'm going to put my start in the refrigerator until next week when I decide that I want to make some more bread. I tend to make bread once a week, and I like to do 2 loaves. So I also wanted to tell you about the pans. I like to use cast iron. I've used stainless steel, just regular bread pans, but I really like the cast iron. They come out of the pan really well. But there's 2 different kinds. The first pan that I got is a Lodge. So you can kind of see, that it says Lodge on the bottom of the pan, and the shape of it, you can kind of see it's narrow and it's taller. I couldn't get more of these at the time, and I wanted a few more. And so this is a Camp Chef brand, Camp Chef brand, and you can see that it is wider and not quite as tall. So I wanted to make the bread. I'm going to make 2 batches, and it's the dough right now, after we put it into the pan, is going to rise for at least 3 hours. I like to keep an eye on it, and you can kind of see it as it's moving in the pan and gets higher. We don't want it to go all the way up to the sides or over, but you can tell that it's rising, and then that's the time that we want to cook it. It's generally about 2 to 4 hours, depending on the temperature in your house. And then when we cook these 2, we take them out, you can kind of see the difference in the loaves. They still come out great. They both come out as bread, but it's just neat to kind of see the differences. Okay, I'm going to show you what the dough itself looks like. You can see it has some bubbles in it, that it has been fermenting, and it's getting happy. And so we can tell that it's ready to be put into the pan. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use coconut oil to grease the pans. So I'm just going to do one of them, show you how we just spread the coconut oil around. I like using coconut oil more than like a spray because it's not thick enough, but also I like just straight oil, not the contents of like canola oil or the additives or things they might put in a spray one. You wouldn't want to use olive oil because it's too liquidy and isn't as good of a high heat oil. Avocado oil is a good high heat oil, but it's liquid, and so then it doesn't spread around in the pan the same way. So you can see we've got the coconut oil that you can actually see, you know, how thick and spread around it is. That's going to keep it from sticking while it's cooking. I like to use my rice scooper, but I call it a scraper for bread dough. And I'm going to scrape it into the pan. All right, so the first thing I'm going to show you is how I just scrape the dough off the sides so that it's not sticking. And then I'm going to pour it right into the pan. All right, so you can see that it scrapes out of the bowl fairly easy. You're not going to get every little single gooey bit, but we're going to get the majority of it. You can see the consistency of the dough. Sometimes it's a little bit thicker, but generally you don't want it any thinner than what we've got here. This is going to cook up real nicely, but if it's too thick, it's a lot harder for it to scrape into the pan. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get a clean towel and I'm going to cover the pan just so that we don't get any dust, dirt, flies, fingers, any of that kind of stuff from people in the household into your dough, and just cover it. Let it rise for 2 to 3 hours. You can check on it if you want to, but we'll meet you back here soon to show you us putting it in the oven and then when it comes out. See you then. Hi, and welcome back. We have our bread in bread pans. I'm going to show it to you. It's been sitting in the pans for 3 hours. So you can see the bubbles in it. It hasn't risen a lot. Sometimes that happens, but we're going to be able to see what it looks like when we put it in the oven. So we've set the oven at 425. We're going to stick these in for 45 minutes, and then we'll show you what they look like when they come out. Okay, we're back with our bread that has been cooked now for 45 minutes at 425 degrees. And today is actually quite a cold day where we're at. And so I noticed that the bread didn't rise as much as it usually does, but it still did some rising. So first I'm going to show it to you. You can see that it domed a little bit so that it rose while it was cooking, but it didn't rise all the way up to the top of the pan like I would have really liked. But that's just a matter of time. If I had let it rise for longer, it would have still kept rising. But for the sake of this video, I wanted to make sure that we got it done in time to show you. This is the more narrow pan. So you can see it's not very deep bread, but it still makes really good bread. And this is the wider pan. They come out real easy, which is nice when you when we put the coconut oil on there. It really helps the bread slide out of the pan nicely. I like to do it right when it comes out of the oven so that it doesn't stay in the pan and sweat. But this one is even more narrow, but it still will be really good. So I want to show you the inside of it and how this bread has a nice light texture to it. So there you can see the bubbles and the air and how it rose, and that it's got a nice spring to it. So it makes great toast, and it has good flavor, but you can see it's a really easy bread to make. It doesn't take a lot of ingredients. It doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, it did take the whole day, but we didn't have to take very much time in each stage. So for the sake of this video, we'll put it all together and you'll see it doesn't take very long overall. But you end up with a nice bread that makes good toast. If it does raise more and get taller, it can make good sandwiches, that kind of thing. But hope that you've learned some good things. We'll put the information in this video with like the recipe and instructions and things like that. So good luck in your bread making journey.